Nebraska's got a new quarterback. How big of a development is this? We break it down next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome. I'm Connor Happer. It's Mitch Sherman. It's time for another installment. We first apologize for being a little bit wonky with our schedule this week.
We've been busy this week.
Been a little busy this week, and we'll get into some of that later in the show. But Nebraska football has been busy too. Matt Rhule at a press conference yesterday. A few of the support staff members had a press conference yesterday, and an addition was confirmed, as we talked about last week. Jalyn Gramstad, the NAIA Player of the Year out of Northwestern College in Iowa. He is joining Nebraska in their quarterback room. As Mitch said, the cold open. I think it's a really big deal. It takes a lot of pressure off of the guys, I think, around him in that quarterback room, probably not named Dylan Raiola, and maybe a little bit Dylan Raiola. But Mitch, where does your mind go first when you think about an addition to the quarterback room?
You know, the first place my mind goes is just like how bizarre this whole situation is. That 2 weeks ago, we had never heard the name Jalyn Gramstad. And then on June 10th, he walked into post-grad camp, and we did a whole episode on Gramstad and the other quarterback, the JUCO quarterback, Bryce Conover, who came to that camp. They paid $25 to go to camp, like showed up with their shoes over their shoulders and, knapsacks, and nobody knew what position they played. Maybe a little more so even on the surprising side with Gramstad, because he alerted no one that he was coming. There was no media coverage of this. And this is like, look, he didn't win the Fiesta Bowl last year. He didn't play for an FCS championship. He was at the NAIA level, which is pretty low down the list of, the cascade of talent in college football. But nonetheless, he threw for almost 7,000 yards the last couple years. He's an athlete. I watched him move around on the Hawks field without having any clue who he was, and I could tell the guy had played some quarterback. So the fact that this all came together and the quarterback who Nebraska found ultimately is somebody who isn't coming in with the expectation to be the starter. Does he want to compete? Absolutely. He's a competitor. But it's not like most players you would get in a transfer situation where they're looking for somewhere they can go and be the guy from day one. And he has all this experience, and he can help the quarterbacks in the room. I think there was just such a tiny, tiny window to find the right fit. Like, Nebraska wanted to add a quarterback after the spring. You could tell from the way that Matt Rhule described it, but I don't know if they knew that player was out there. And if you were to draw somebody up, maybe you wouldn't put him at the NAIA level, but in every other way, it would be exactly like what Jalyn Gramstad appears to be.
Yeah, you're basically designing him in a lab, like this target in a lab.
That's what happened.
Because here's the deal. Like, I was thinking about it this way. We obviously look at it through the prism of Nebraska, and it like you said, he kind of just slips right through a perfect crack in order to be on Nebraska's roster next year. But if the NAIA Player of the Year, who threw for 7,000 yards over his career so far, and won a lot of football games, hopped in the transfer portal and said, "Hey, I'm available. Come offer me a scholarship, or I want to hear what you guys have to say," and projects that to everybody around the country, he's going to get some takers, and he's certainly not going to go to Nebraska to walk on to be their backup, or to be their third string or whatever it's going to end up being. So it worked out so perfectly for Nebraska in that he grew up a Nebraska fan and on a whim kept it really quiet. Last second, decided to go to a camp, and Nebraska decides that it's an investment kind of worth making. And I agree with them. There was so many things that had to go right in this situation. We talked about that even before Gramstad was on the radar. It was going to be really difficult to find a person who fits this description. And it may have even worked out better than I thought it could have for Nebraska in this situation.
Who would have thought that there was this quarterback with that kind of experience and that kind of like pedigree and makeup who was sitting 3 hours away from Lincoln? I mean, it's what I mean, in what world does that happen? If you're right, if he went in the portal, Connor, I think that just about every FCS program in the country that had a need for a quarterback would have been calling him and doing whatever was possible to get him to come on a visit and see him throw. So he helps Nebraska, I think, more off the field and just in like the background noise stuff than he does. Like, is he going to throw for 1,000 yards this season? Probably not. If he does, that means something.
Yeah, hope not.
Went something went off the rails, injury wise or whatever. But him being there, the thing that, and I talked about this when we went in depth on this subject over a week ago. The thing that impressed me about him and watching him and in talking to him is the presence and maturity and just kind of I don't need a bunch of attention thrown at me. I don't need to impress you with what I'm saying. He has a very cool demeanor about him that you want to see from a quarterback, and that I think is infinitely more valuable for Nebraska in this situation because it's got two true freshmen among the three players who are on scholarship in that room.
He's experienced. He's older. I mean, obviously there's a gap from the level he's been playing at to the level he's going to be asked to practice at and to potentially play at Nebraska. But I think that I totally agree with you. That is less of the, if you're making bullet points of describe to me this situation and what could be the good things and what could be the bad things, like the actual, changing competition from the NAIA level to the Power 5 level, while it's vast, it's not one of the first 3 to 5 things that pop up on this list, simply because he means more as an addition to the room than he does as an addition to the field for Nebraska. And so that's what you're selling guys on in the transfer portal or, when you're out recruiting. And I don't even know that Nebraska really super actively did that. They just happened to late in the summer found this guy who fell directly into their lap. He literally showed up on their door, knocked on the door and said, "Hey, can I come play for you guys? Oh, by the way, I thrown for 7,000 yards in college." So, I mean, it's impossible to put into words like how fortunate I think Nebraska got here. And that this is not to mean that this guy's going to be good or once again, the playing side is not even the thing that comes to mind here. It's just the ability of what he gives you the ability to do other things with other people in that room. And then of course, safety nets in college football are they don't happen very much at the quarterback position anymore. Guys leave, they go play other places. They want to play. And here you got a guy who wants to just play for Nebraska straight up. He just wants to wear a Nebraska uniform and he's got credentials. I mean, it couldn't have worked out better.
Before we talk just real quick about what he could mean for Heinrich Haarberg, I want to say one other thing that makes this situation unique and interesting and just like an added element to it. Gramstad went to West Lyon High School and he won a state championship there in Iowa's small class football. You know who else went to West Lyon High School is LeVar Woods, who is the premier assistant coach, obviously alongside Phil Parker. At the University of Iowa. I mean, LeVar Woods he's the best recruiter, I would say, on staff. I mean, Seth Wallace is a good recruiter, but he's the guy who recruits over in this part of Western Iowa and into Nebraska. So he knows that area inside and out. And if there's a player from Northwestern or from West Lyon who needs to be on the radar, LeVar Woods is going to know about it. I guarantee LeVar Woods had a sense of who this was and who needs a quarterback more than any program in college football. I recognize that Iowa, is going to get Cade McNamara back and they have a transfer from within the Big Ten, but the Hawkeyes quarterback play has been abysmal.
Yeah.
And Jalyn Gramstad would have been the best healthy quarterback on Iowa's roster last year. So the fact that he didn't end up there that he was a Nebraska fan growing up. And Lincoln is closer to Orange City and West Lyon than it is to Leicester, Iowa, than it is to Iowa City. But still, he's in the state of Iowa, and Iowa didn't get a sniff at this guy, and now he's coming to Nebraska. That's
great point.
Just another element that's interesting.
Yeah, if that would have been at all a possibility, it would have been explored for sure. Okay, so then just quickly here, 1 or 2 more minutes on this before we talk about some other stuff. Like I said, the effect that it has on other players in that room, I think specifically, and we talked about this in the pod that we did last week, but I mean, it really opens things up a little bit here for Heinrich Haarberg, and now you can start to dream a little bit with what his role is going to be. It's a really big deal for Daniel Kaelin and his development, although you may not see those results like directly right away this year. I mean, I think it immediately impacts Heinrich Haarberg and what you can do with him on the field, assuming that you feel comfortable enough to have Gramstad, put him in a game in an emergency kind of backup quarterback situation. I guess, how do you break that whole thing down?
Yeah, he's got to get in the playbook now. And I mean, you think at 22 years old with the experience that he's got, that's gonna be like second nature to him. Like, he's in Lincoln now. It's June 21st. Get in that playbook, start working. I'm sure he'll embrace that. And then you got to go to Haarberg and find out, like, where's his mind at with this thing? Like, does Heinrich want to be 100% fully committed to being the quarterback, winning the job? I mean, you would think he would. Matt Rhule has not announced a starter, and I don't know necessarily what the dynamic is within the room. Outside the program, we all believe that Dylan Raiola is the guy 100%, like 99%. It's going to happen. Heinrich Haarberg probably doesn't look at it that way. So, how will he approach something where if the coaches go to him and say, all right, we have more freedom now, we would like you to take some reps in camp at H-back, at tight end, at fullback, being used on a jet sweep in a system where you might be able to throw a pass from a running back or wide receiver spot. These are things, Heinrich, that can help you become an NFL player because you're that good of an athlete. How will he take to that? And they couldn't really do that without someone like Jalyn Gramstad in the program. Now they can. Over the next 6 weeks, I am very curious where that's going to go.
All right. We will take a quick time out here. We'll come back. Please subscribe, follow us on Twitter. You can tweet at us there at LockedOnNEB. You can email us lockedonneb@gmail.com. We'll be back. Talk a little bit about some of our various encounters this week coming up on the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die or alive. What's your ride or die? That's your car. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and plenty more. So whether you're into speed or power or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, with all the parts you need at, of course, the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers.
Okay, welcome back on a Friday. We have been kind of out and about all week. Had a Monday show for you where we talked about Dayton Raiola and his appearance at the Friday Night Lights camp in Lincoln a week ago. Today, camp season is over at Nebraska. We are getting toward the end of June. The Huskers have got a big weekend of official visits coming into to Lincoln here on this Friday. So we'll talk about some of that in the third segment. We've also got a bonus show coming for you, so be on alert for that in your feeds on Saturday. It's actually our third pod of the week, so that's not technically a bonus, but it's a bonus because of the content. I think all of you viewers and listeners are going to like what we've got coming for you. We have a guest. It's going to get away from some of the daily stuff that can get mundane in June. So be on the lookout for that. This June, especially has not been mundane around Nebraska. Connor, you got to see Trev Alberts this week at the College World Series on your work duty down at Charles Schwab Field. I do not know anything about this. You've only mentioned to me via text while I was in New York City for company meetings since Monday that you met up with Chuck down with Trev down at the Chuck.
Yeah.
So tell me what happened.
Well, okay. So first of all, by the way, at my time at the College World Series this week, there was a couple people who came up while I was doing shows out at the Omaha Baseball Village and said, "Hey, where's the pod today? Where's Mitch? Are you supposed to be doing a pod?" I thought that was great. Yeah, keep bothering us about that. It'll keep us on track. So that's a good thing. So yeah, this was, and it's hard to put all the days together. I think it was during the second Texas A&M game, which would have been Monday night, I suppose.
I have no idea.
I believe that's right. I believe this is all correct. And
that's right. Yeah.
I work with the Westwood One national radio broadcast, and so we get a couple, maybe more, just slivers of information from the building or other people there. But everybody's wondering if Trev was there, and I think people kind of knew he was there in the first place. And so you've come to find out, yeah, he's there. He wanted to keep it pretty on the down low that he was there. Some of the quote unquote celebrities will say, will project it to everybody and say, "Hey, I'm here. You can come interview me," whatever it might be. Eric Church, by the way, was not one of those guys who I did talk to. I just found him. That was kind of lucky and random. I talked to him during one of the games. So I went up to the suite level, and I just barged into his suite. And the first person I see when I walk in is Angie Alberts. And she's like, "Can I help you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, good to see you. And we're just wondering if Trev wanted to do a couple minutes on, it's hard to explain because we're local and, local faces. But it's a national radio broadcast that will be played locally. So there's not going to be any questions about, hey,
you got to lean into the national thing in that moment."
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's what I tried to do. Hey, there's not gonna be any questions about Nebraska or anything like that. And, she kind of plays liaison and goes up to Trev and say, "Hey, hey, honey, do you want to do this?" And eventually you could tell that he was, thinking no. And then he turned around. He's like, let me see what's going on here. So he talked for a couple minutes, and they were super nice. No, we don't want to stir the pot. We don't want to, poke the bear or anything like that. And I think the other thing he said, which is legit, is, they wanted it to be, I think that they probably, Trev, learned a lesson from like the whole tweeting through it at first thing. I don't think they don't want to do stuff like that anymore. He doesn't want to do that anymore. I think he's, wants it to be about the team. They got a chance to win a national championship. They haven't won a major men's national championship since 1939. And that's a football claim national championship. And so, we sat there and we talked and joked for a couple minutes, and I was like, no big deal, off. And, I know many people have gotten pictures of him standing outside of his suite this week. So, but yeah, he was really nice, and just ultimately didn't want to do an interview, which I do not blame him for.
You were like, at what point were you like, why did you turn your back on Matt Rhule? Like, I mean, no,
I shouted at him. There wasn't I think one of his sons was he has one son, right? Or maybe
his son went to Army. Yeah, I believe they have a son and a daughter, and his son is an Army grad.
Yeah, I think his son was in there as well, but it wasn't like, because each team that plays on any given game at the College World Series has access to kind of this team suite. It's one of the bigger ones and whatever, and he was in that one. There wasn't a whole lot of people in there. A few years ago, I talked to Buzz Williams, who's the basketball coach there at that, and he wasn't in that area. So they were really nice about it, and ultimately didn't want to do anything. And he hasn't done any interviews in town at all, and he's staying through the weekend.
So were people like throwing tomatoes and stuff at him from down in the stands up like at the windows of the suite or
That's
anything
the
like
great
what?
part about suite level. Like you
Yeah.
just, it's a little isolated. You're on a bit of a perch up there. It is funny because most of the photographers, they're on the, they're down on the field level, and you're like shooting up at him, and it just gives off this like, oh, he's up there far away from everybody else, and we're way
The ivory
zoomed in.
tower.
Yeah, it kind of gives away that kind of vibe. But no, I mean, I have all the respect in the world for him, and he's he had his reasons for leaving, and I have no problem with that.
Let's just consider for a minute what he's walked into at Texas A&M. We described this when it happened in March as a lateral move, and I don't necessarily think any different now because as an athletic department, yes, Texas A&M has more money than Nebraska, but they both play in the power. They're at the top level of college sports. And if we're talking about like prestige, power, the importance of a job as a college athletic director, you're not really basing that on what their baseball program is all about. Clearly A&M is ahead of Nebraska as a baseball program, but college baseball is like it rides the coattails of football and even basketball to a certain degree. So if you put it all together, yeah, A&M's in a better spot athletically than Nebraska. It's on the doorstep of a national championship in baseball. And, the Aggies beat Nebraska in the first round of the NCAA men's basketball tournament. Nebraska got the better of A&M in the women's tournament. So look, it's a lateral move. Like their programs. He's not at Texas. He's not at Ohio State. But what he's walked into there to have the immediate success in College Station with the programs that he's overseeing is pretty incredible. And what you mentioned, the statistic that you mentioned about how A&M has not won a men's championship in a major team sport since 1939. There is not a person alive on earth who played for a national championship, even played for one at A&M in a major men's sports championship. That's going to change. I mean, if A&M wins one game here this weekend in Omaha against Tennessee, every baseball player on that team is playing for a national championship. You win the game, you're a national champion. So this is a landmark moment for Texas A&M, and Trev has found himself right in the middle of it.
Yeah, no, that's I didn't think about it, people alive that way, but no doubt he's walked into a great situation.
There's some guy on Twitter who's a Texas fan who hates A&M with all the passion in the world, who tweets these things like that about Texas A&M, about how like there's no person alive who's ever seen Texas A&M win a sporting event, things like that.
Yeah, he's got one of the best baseball coaches in the country. He's got they just hired a new football coach. They got a pretty good basketball coach. Before he got up to Omaha, he was at the sold out 100,000 capacity George Strait concert at Kyle Field. And then the week before that, they played a international soccer friendly at Kyle Field. So Trev's doing Trev stuff. They're doing big events and they're making money off of it. And so it's the same game plan, just maybe with a little closer to that end goal for him at A&M.
I like that. Trev's doing Trev stuff. We may even make that the title of this podcast. So. All right. When we come back, we're going to talk about Matt Rhule. Always will be tied to Trev Alberts in some way or another. And he had some media availability on Thursday, other things going on in the Nebraska football program outside of that quarterback edition. That is coming up next. But first, if you are watching TV all day and have to turn down the volume because of the shouting in the sporting world, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today delivers can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news. It's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right. Before we get out of here on a Friday, and once again, we'll have a kind of a bonus episode coming for you guys tomorrow if you're listening here with us on Friday. So we'll put something out tomorrow morning, which I think you'll enjoy. But back for our third and final segment. Got some recruiting things going on. Nebraska's actually added to its 2024 class. We talked about Jalyn Gramstad earlier. We've talked about David Hufkin before, the German offensive lineman. He is in Lincoln for the very first time this weekend. We'll be excited to get all the stories coming out of that one. I'm sure he'll have a lot of thoughts. Sierra Wright, the former USC corner who is in the portal, also played LeBron's son in Space Jam 2, is in Lincoln this weekend.
Great nugget.
Yeah, amazing. He's got a young budding acting career. Chase Lofton, the 2025 tight end, is in town. He's a major target. He's been to visits around the region this month. He took official visits to Texas A&M, coincidentally, in Florida State. And he's probably the most coveted target in the state, just in terms of who's recruiting him and where. Jamarian Parker, the running back from St. Louis, is visiting. He is already committed to Nebraska in the 2025 class, and he is he's a guy that Nebraska needs to keep in there in that running back room. And then Matt Rhule had some media availability yesterday. He said he said the word murder, which obviously is going to make the sports talk radio shows. But he was talking about how if you're going to have a single high safety, we're going to murder you. If you're going to
murder you,
if you're going to have two high safeties, we're going to run the ball on you. He was getting fired up for June. He talked about some other things that are going on in the program. Mitch, what'd you take away from yesterday?
So I wrote a story about Elliott Brown in November. Elliott Brown is Lance Brown's son. Lance Brown played receiver and did backflips for Nebraska in the 90s. Very flamboyant personality and type of player, a winner all the way around. And Elliott has just been this unique persona since he got to Nebraska. Was big on the social media scene, kind of an influencer of sorts when he was still in high school. Came to Nebraska as a walk-on, like, okay, this guy's probably not going to make an impact on the field. And I couldn't have been more wrong in thinking that. He's not out there catching passes or anything like that. And he actually tore his ACL in November. Nebraska thought so much of him that they continued to take him on the road when he was healthy. When he was able to go, not coming out of surgery after the injury, because he's just a guy who has such an impact on the program. And it was great to sit down with Elliott and hear his story. And you can follow him on social media and be entertained by that, or you can just look at who he is as a person and recognize the fact that, like, he runs his own youth camps around Omaha invariably. And he made a comment to Matt Rhule when the Huskers had a youth camp in Omaha that his camps are run so much better than Nebraska's. And Matt Rhule could just kind of shake his head and say, yeah, they probably are. Elliott is like a coach. He wears a headset. He allows Garrett McGuire and Nebraska's other coaches to do their jobs better. I don't know what he's going to do when it's all said and done, if he goes into coaching or something bigger.
Well, didn't Rhule mention that they actually, he's technically on staff? Like he's a player, but they hired him to actual.
Yeah, I don't know if they're paying him or exactly what I don't know how that works. But essentially, yes. Whether there's money being exchanged, all within the rules, of course, or it's just like that's his unofficial title. They're doing whatever they can with him. So Rhule talked about him. That was a takeaway. He talked about Jaden Doss. Confirmed he's officially moved to corner. We had an episode a couple weeks ago about whether the defensive backfield is a concern for Nebraska as Blyhill comes back from injury, and you had the departure. You had a departure in the secondary here this offseason. So Jaden Doss is there, and he's going to play cornerback, but he's inexperienced. That's why Sierra Wright, the actor, is important in this discussion. Interesting also to hear him talk about Kirk Ferentz. And this was like unsolicited. Rhule just began to talk about how much respect he has for the Iowa coach and how he handles the coin toss.
He said, the question was like, what'd you learn about the Big Ten? He was like, well, I learned that it's really windy and that Kirk Ferentz is a genius for taking the win. And then they ended up, beating us in the fourth quarter with kicking a field goal with the win. I mean, that was genius. I'm going to start doing that. He also is simultaneously aware of he even mentioned in the little bit where he was talking about Ferentz about how I know the headline that's going to go viral. Coach Rhule said that Kirk Ferentz is smarter than me. Well, maybe he is. so there was a lot in that answer too.
He did himself a favor by talking about absolutely murdering people or teams. Other teams, opponents, because that maybe overshadowed the Kirk Ferentz is smarter than me comment. So, but it's all out. It's all out there. I watched this. Sadly, was not able to be there because I was coming back from New York. But I watched it on the runway at LaGuardia as we taxied out to take off. And
no better place.
I was entertained.
No better place. Yeah. I mean, there was some good stuff in there. I could tell you the thing that I'm going to play on my show today is about the murder. I mean, how could you not play that on Sports Talk Radio? I mean, but there was a lot of good substance in there. And this is kind of it now. I mean, the next time we'll hear from Matt Rhule in this public of a setting is Big Ten Media Days, which is coming up in about a month now. So they'll take probably 1 or 2 days off. Rhule mentioned yesterday, but outside of that, you're still kind of managing the day-to-day, the football program, and there's a lot of stuff on that guy's plate. So by the way, here's one thing to keep an eye on just before we get to media days. So he's very tan right now.
He is.
Will he be tanner in a month, or will he be less tan? Because he was very tan at media days last year.
Yeah, he's going to be tan. If the sun's out on the beach in New Jersey in July, that's really the only time he gets to take maybe a week or whatever. And last year it was hard for him to even do that because the family was moving. They get to their spot. But the tan's not going anywhere until training camp starts, and then it'll fade.
Yep. All right. That's it for this one, and then we'll get back to you with a little bonus episode with a little side content coming up here this weekend. But a quick reminder before we get out of here that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and it's now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app.